Hello, and welcome to the Delicious Recipe. Here it's Thursday, and as we're in March, the Ides of March, as some would say up here in Thunder Bay, Canada, we just had a snowfall that like dumped 30 centimeters on us. But other than that, we have a wonderful guest on here again that I'm glad that he took his time there to join us once again. He's got another book coming out, Echoes of Eden, that comes through from the beginning part, Escaping Eden, The Scars of Eden, now Echoes of Eden, and this is coming out May 1st. And I just want to introduce to everybody out there again to Paul Anthony Wallis.
G'day, Dale. Thanks for having me on your show again.
Yes, well, it says like we're coming into spring right now, and I guess down there you're going into fall. Like we're on. I'm in the
Yes, we are.
Well, this is the wonders of technology. I'm in the northern hemisphere on the other side of the earth, and you're down in the southern hemisphere on the bottom part of the earth. I guess up and down, I guess, is sort of relative to, I guess, perspective, though. But we're on.
Well, I guess it is, but we're in a future season, and it's Friday where I am. So
Yes, there we go. So we're in two different days. This makes it for a very interesting thing. But the wonders of technology, we can be almost in the same room at the same time.
yes, it's
So,
wonderful.
so just I know people know who you are. Probably watched you, The Fifth Kind. I've loved watching all the stuff that goes on with that show too as well. And I've read your books, and I just started reading Laura Lee, my other half, who I guess you're going to be on there next week with. She gave me a part copy of the book. I started reading it, and it was started off super interesting, and it's a very interesting story. The beginning part, I only got a little bit in there today, and it's sort of an interesting drop in, I guess, is that if you were put into a situation, I guess the story of Troy, that you're put into this story that actually, you know what? We won't go to that part there yet. We'll leave that a little bit for a bit there. Just tell
Okay,
everybody. Let's tell everybody who you are and how you came to be. A brief.
sure. Well, people know me as a writer in the field of paleocontact, and
Mm,
that's the theory that our ancestors in the deep past had contact with other civilizations. And I find evidences for that, particularly in our world's ancestral narratives. And my journey into that territory began in the Bible. My background is in Christian ministry as a theological educator, an archdeacon for the Anglican Church in Australia, a church doctor. And through all that time, I was teaching pastors how to interpret ancient texts, the principles of hermeneutics, it's called. And it was really through the disciplines of that subject that I started drilling down into some of the questions and anomalies from the texts of the Bible. And it was those that led me into the world of paleocontact. And once I'd gone there, I realized that the stories that had been curated in the Bible find parallels in cultures all around the world. And they present a very different story of human origins and of human potential today. And that's what I'm exploring in Echoes of Eden.
mm-hmm. And that's sort of an interesting thing because, like you said, there's that. Even though with the different contents we have, they all sort of have this very similar story of something, how they began, whether they call it a different name or whatever, and they're gods. There could be many or few or whatever, but there's still sort of this, I guess, intervention, I guess you would say, in the uh, humans learning more than what they had.
Yes. So that's right. There are memories of interventions in our planetary history, and many of our world's stories of creation out of different ancestral traditions. When you read them, you realize they're not creation stories because the planet already exists with eyewitnesses on it when the story begins. And you realize you're actually looking at an intervention to support life on Earth and to support civilization on Earth after a cataclysm. And so you find that pattern in the Mesoamerican, the Filipino, African, Sumerian, biblical stories. So that's one kind of intervention. And then there's also a memory of adaptations being made to our ancestors to upgrade them for higher intelligence and higher consciousness. then it was actually that question that when I was 11 years old really piqued my interest, because I could see there was a gap in our ability to explain ourselves as a species. From a religious viewpoint, if we're a special creation of God, how come it's so obvious we're actually just one of the animals, that we are a kind of primate? Then if we go to science for an explanation as to how come we're the alpha species on the planet, that's only explainable because of our technology, our high intelligence, and our higher consciousness, and we can't quite pinpoint where that came from.
Hmm.
Whereas our ancestral narratives do pinpoint it, and they say that our ancestors were developing on this planet, and then there was an external intervention to upgrade our ancestors for higher intelligence, higher consciousness, and nurture us in all the rudiments of life as a civilization on planet Earth. And it's the correlations of those stories all around the world from different cultures that had no contact with each other that first really got my attention and drew me into the topic.
Yeah, and I think there's a part is that or not a part, but I've been seeing is um, through history is when they talk to these ancient or not or cultures that were there. A lot of the thing was when like these amazing structures that were built, and they're saying, well, we just it was there already.
Oh, yes, certainly. When you listen to the stories of beginnings from out of Central and South America,
Hmm.
very often that's what the local traditional information is. These structures were here when we arrived. We didn't build this.
Hmm. Yeah, because there's like even like I can't remember what that temple is in India that was carved out of one piece of black stone. Like it wasn't like added together, and like the intricate detail work that was done into that, and that's like ancient old. And if you're thinking about that, we went through from stone tools to copper tools, or then harder metals and stuff like that. And this stone is like harder than the hardest stuff that we have there today to even do the sort of intricate work that was done in moving megalithic blocks and stuff like that, and building the pyramids. And there's pyramids all over the earth that maybe people don't realize that it wasn't just in Egypt that that's the one pyramid or the set of pyramids. It's just a amazing thought to give in there. But as we went through school, we were told this is how the progression of man was. And I think you agree there is that the story that we've been told is not the story that really is.
Well, yes, you've got questions of technology coming from out of nowhere, and then you've got questions over the timing of megalithic cultures. So, you go to Egypt and you'll find that the more advanced technology is earlier, that the more advanced megalithic structures are from pre-dynastic Egypt. Well,
Hmm.
where did that come from?
Right.
And all we have is a story of hunter gatherers, and then all of a sudden, more advanced technology than dynastic Egypt had. So you've got that as a mystery for a start. But also, then there's the dating of these things, and there's great controversy and debates over the dating of the Sphinx and the pyramids on the Giza plateau. You can go to other parts of the world and you will find similar mysteries, because if we want to trace the origins of our civilization as we know it, at the moment, conventionally, you'd have to go to Karakadag in southeast Turkey.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it was there in 1998 that Manfred Hoyne went with a team from the University of Az in Norway and the Max Planck Institute, because they had identified what appears to be the first farm, the place where all of a sudden, very locally, we learned out how to genetically modify naturally occurring plants to turn them into cultivatable crops. 11 crops we did this with. And it's quite a subtle operation. Just with one of them, you'd have to modify 2 genes
Hmm.
to turn it into a cultivatable crop. And these people, this tribe, or even one family, Manfred Hoyne posited, worked out how to do this 11 times over. Well, it took William Farrer, what was it, 20 years to work out how to do that to Federation wheat with all the advantages of 19th century science and a background in agriculture behind him. 20 years to do that to wheat. This family did it 11 times over, which is a bit of a mystery. And at the same time, coincidentally, worked out how to do animal husbandry. So it's a massive leap forward. All of a sudden, you've got farms in southeast Turkey. Then they pepper up all around the world. Farms mean surpluses. That means specialized society. And all of a sudden, you can start settling, building towns, cities, and a civilization. That's how the story goes. That's where we come from, apparently, except that farm 10,000 years ago in southeast Turkey is, I think it's 800 miles down the road from Göbekli Tepe,
Right.
which is a megalithic structure that is part of a megalithic society that appears to be coming towards the end of its period on Earth, because it's then buried very carefully
Yes.
to hide it, preserve it. And so it really looks like in southeast Turkey, about 10,000 years ago, you've got the dovetailing of two civilizations, the ending of one megalithic society, and then the reinvention of farming. And it's an interesting time period because the invention of farming comes as we are moving out of the devastation of the Younger Dryas cold period. And so that's really intriguing because it suggests very strongly everything we know about civilization is only about the current civilization.
Right.
What about the ones that came before? What about the megalithic structures under the waters of the Gulf of Cambay off the coast of India or off the coast of Malta? Or there are various other places, Yonaguni-jima, off the coast of Japan, where you've got megalithic remains of cities that would have been above sea level no more recently than 10,000 years ago. So there's another culture we don't know anything about or where they got their high tech from.
Right. Yeah, and they're even finding stuff like even up here in Canada and well, Canada, U.S., the Great Lakes. They're finding uh, structures, circles, just stuff like I guess you would say the like ritual, like not like Stonehenge or similar to Stonehenge, but even laid out stones that are large stones in certain areas that are like way off the shoreline where the water levels were totally not there before, right? And now they're up higher because of something that, well, because whatever cataclysm happened and the ground and everything there changed. And I want to go into one part there is, I guess, in the Bible, they said there is that when the fallen ones that had coming down, they had taught man geometry, not geometry, well, they taught the sciences, astrology, astronomy, how to make weapons, and that was sort of the way that they sort of said that somebody had come in and taught the people that didn't know anything, and that was sort of a boost. And you can, if you look at that part there, you go, maybe was that taken from another story of somebody coming down and giving a boost to civilization?
Well, those stories exist all around the world. I remember going to Brazil in the 1980s, and I was there at a time of harvest festivals. And at first, I was watching festivals that I thought were Roman Catholic festivals because there'd be activity outside the church, and then we'd go into the church for a mass. But I had a guide who was very helpful, and he said, "This may look like a Catholic festival, but let me just tell you this. Everything that happens outside the church before we go in has nothing to do with Roman Catholicism. So you might want to ask a few questions of what we're doing here." And so I asked, what's the celebration about? Now, I should say my Brasileiro was very basic at the time, so I really had to uh, work hard to get to grips with what I was being told. And what I was told was, oh, we're celebrating the Queen of Heaven. And so afterwards, debriefing with my guide, Augusto, he said, what did you find out? And I said, oh, I think we're thanking Jesus' mum for the harvest. The Queen of Heaven is a Catholic title that's given to Mary. So I think that's what's going on. And he said, oh, is that right? He said, do you remember the little figurines in the house we stayed in last night, in Rita's house, these little porcelain figures on the coffee table? And I said, oh, yes. Saint George and Mary, Our Lady. And he said, "What makes you think that's who those figures were?" And I said, "Oh, well, George was wearing his uniform with the cross and he had his sword, and Mary, well, that's a traditional depiction. She's in blue, she's holding the baby." And he said, "Well, what if I tell you that our host, Rita, has roots on her mother's side in indigenous Brazil, and that there are traditions and stories and ceremonies she'll have inherited from that side of her family? She may be using those figurines for those ceremonies. And then she's got heritage on her dad's side from West Africa. I think about 4 million West Africans were brought over as slaves to Brazil over a 300-year period. And so there's a lot of African practice and ceremony and belief that was brought then. How do you know that she's not performing some ceremonies out of that heritage? So we're going to another harvest festival tomorrow. He said, you might want to ask some more probing questions. So we went to the next harvest festival and I said, oh, what are we celebrating here? It was a wonderful party and it was full of every kind of food and drink you can imagine derived from corn, because we were celebrating the corn harvest. Well, when I asked, I was told we're celebrating the gift of corn from the Queen of Heaven. And I said, can you tell me a bit more of that? Yes, they said the Queen of Heaven came down from the heavens in the deep past and taught our ancestors how to cultivate corn and turn it into foods.
Wow.
And all of a sudden I realized this Queen of Heaven was not Jesus's mum. This was ages old. This was deep in our ancestral past. This is the great leap forward that we were talking about before in Karakadag, when our ancestors learned how to go from living on the planet in animal subsistence to knowing how to farm and build cities and a civilization. And the Queen of Heaven was the one who came and taught us this. Well, many years later, I learned the stories from out of the Zulu tradition of Mbabwana Warisa, who taught the Zulu ancestors how to cultivate crops and live on the land and how to make beer. And then I find the story of Shamhat in the Sumerian story, teaching the wild man about cultivatable foods and introducing him to beer. And then you can go to ancient Babylon and listen to the story of Oannes and the Apkallu, these non-human entities who had nothing to do with the mother of Jesus, non-human entities who turn up in strange clothing and teach the ancient Babylonians ancestors how to cultivate crops, how to build cities, how to create a money system, how to create banking, legal systems, civil engineering, geometry, as you mentioned, mathematics, cosmology, all the accoutrements of civilization, the Babylonians said, came from somewhere else and were given to our ancestors in the deep past. These stories reflect all around the world. And it's a very interesting story because the story doesn't aggrandize our great rulers, our royal families. It's saying actually all this expertise came from another species, and they very kindly sat down and taught our ancestors. If you listen to the stories of Native Americans, First Nation Canadians, Aboriginal Australians, the Dogon people from Mali and West Africa, they will all tell you the same. And some of those traditions are very specific about where those helpers came from, and they're very specific that they came from off planet, and they will name the regions of space that these visitors came from to support civilized life on Earth and the story of the human race.
Yeah, and I think also there to add that is that through that story is, and then they went away.
And then they went away. That's right. They came, they sat with our ancestors for a while. They supported us, they taught us, they assisted us, and then they returned home to a planet orbiting a star somewhere in the Pleiades or in Sirius or in Orion. And those are the three regions of space that get the most mention.
Yeah, and then there's other parts there. I think with the Hopi Indians, there is that the Ant people, they went underground into down into the center of the earth, right? So there's two
Yes.
parts, either
Yes.
internal or external.
That's right.
Yeah, and that comes into this whole part. There is that there's a lot of part of stories about interdimensional stargates, and I think there's certain huge megalithic structures, I guess, or certain areas around, especially I guess in South America, and that where they have these the gateway that goes through there that's got the big crack in it. I can't remember what the name of that one is right now, or the door uh,
Yes.
that has the key, and then at a certain time, if you have the certain key to open that, that unlocks a doorway. And then there's other ones, I guess, that were all through the Middle East that have been talked about, and
Yes.
conspiracy theory that there is stargates over there, and that's the reason that the U.S. went into these countries, was to go and receive these things, and in with conjunction with the Smithsonian Institute and the British Museum, and to hide all this stuff away from people. But that's all conspiracy theory. But there could be some truth to some of this stuff.
Well, it's not just conspiracy theory because those stories in our ancestral narratives as well. Aboriginal Australians talk about portals, and there are sacred places in Australia that Aboriginal elders believe operate as portals, and I have friends who've had experience of those. NASA has invested millions of dollars over more than 30 years into understanding portals. And when I say understanding, I mean flying around a portal and measuring the mass of matter that is traveling through the portal, which opens and closes above planet Earth on an 8-minute cycle. So suddenly you're talking about something very objective, so
Right.
objective that they can fly craft around it, so objective they can measure the mass of material going into it. So there's that kind of a wormhole, which is, 30 years ago, NASA scientists were addressing the question, can we fly a craft through it?
Right.
What they found out since, of course, I don't know. I'm not privy to all that information, but they were already investigating that possibility 30 years ago, investing serious money into it. So there is some grounding to this topic of portals. It's not just from out of the world of science fiction. NASA has spent a lot of money trying to work out if they can artificially create wormholes as a propulsion system. And of course, that's the system iconized by the Star Trek canon, where you warp space and then you fly into the warp that you created. So that's taken very seriously by NASA. It's taken very seriously by our ancestors. And since I published Escaping from Eden, I've heard from a lot of veterans of war, particularly those who were involved in the 2003 incursion into Iraq, who've come to me and they've said, what's the credibility of portals? Because on the ground, this was what I was hearing, that there was high technology that was a part of what we were there to sequester, and some of it revolved around portals. Is that credible? And so I was able to say, have been able to say to those who've asked me those questions, well, it's credible in the sense that that's a report that's thousands of years old. It's credible in the sense that NASA invests serious money into it. And if you look for the ancestral narratives that talk about portals, they do place them in the Middle East. They place them on the Shinar Plain. They place them in what is now modern day Iraq. So if you were expecting to find portals on planet Earth, yes, you'd be in the right place geographically. So those are all reasons to take seriously that report that was a grassroots report among those who were operating in Iraq in 2003. So yes, I think there's something very interesting to pursue there. And I do go some way into that territory in
Mhm.
Echoes of Eden.
Oh, awesome. One question before we go into the whole part of the book there. Do you think this is a theory of mine there? And I'm just wondering, do you think that there was actually many Gardens of Eden, like parts all around in the on the continent? Because this would make sense to me because of the stories are sort of similar, but they twist a little bit or it goes a little bit different. Like it just didn't start in one place out in Europe or in the Middle East or wherever because they don't know where the Garden of Eden really is, but there's been so many theories about it. But my theory is that there could have been one in Australia, there could have been one in Europe, there could have been one in China, one in South America, one in North America. There could have been like just popped up all over the place, and they all started them at the same time, like as a seeding thing to go out.
Yes, I think that's very possible. So many cultures have stories of visitors from the stars coming to their specific people group, and
Mhm,
they will say this is where they arrived, and they may even have memorials to the place where they first met the
mhm,
visitors. So that certainly suggests many visits. Um, it's for a long time been a mystery and a point of great interest to those who study paleontology, human origins, those who study early archaeology, those who study the history of agriculture. It's been a mystery how that sophisticated knowledge of farming peppered up around the planet so quickly,
mhm.
and not just quickly in geological terms, but too quick for it just to have migrated as human beings moved around the planet. That's always been the feeling, the impression, and the mystery that's been studied.
Mhm.
And again, it is a gap in our ability to explain ourselves that becomes more easy to accommodate the moment you say, are we looking at a number of interventions? That what happened at Karakadag was repeated in South America and Central America and
Right.
Northern Europe and in West Africa, so on and so forth. Each culture has a memory of it, a slightly different way of telling it, but
Mhm,
they certainly believe it's their own story they're telling. And
mhm.
so those who live near Lake Titicaca will say it was from out of the lake that the craft appeared and hovered, and it was from those craft that the people came and taught our ancestors. Other parts of the world will be equally specific. This is where we met those who came and taught our ancestors. So I'm with you, Del. I think that there was a planet-wide effort to rehabilitate civilization on Earth and nurture the human story as we know it.
Mhm. Yeah, because I think about the one story there with after the great flood there with Noah, and the one son had run away right after he'd done the sin there, and he ran away. But so if these were the only people that were left after the world was flooded, he ran away and he created a whole new civilization with what female, right?
Well, yes, that's right. It's one of those clues that in Genesis you've got a selection of stories of beginnings that have been put side by side,
Hmm.
a whole sequence of stories of beginnings. And as soon as you recognize that, it makes sense of a lot of jumps in the story. A jump that any child recognizes when they read through even a children's Bible is when you get to the story of Cain and Abel, because by that point, only four human beings have been mentioned: Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel. And when Cain is exiled from the land of Eden,
Hmm.
he's terrified of the people who are going to find him and kill him. Well, what people?
Exactly.
Who? And then who? And then who do the boys marry to create human society?
Hmm.
And it's one of those clues that not only have you got stories alongside each other that have been bought from different sources and just put in a library together, but it also, in that moment, Genesis 3 to Genesis 4, tells you that we've got a particular story about the upgrading of human beings, but they're living on a populated planet.
Right.
And that really does reflect what I think books like the Popol Vuh, the Mayan story of origins, or the Sumerian story of origins, or the biblical stories, when translated in the way I argue for, they are actually recalling a time when human-like beings were modified so that we could be a workforce for our
Mhm,
colonizers. And it meant that we had close relatives living outside these controlled zones who were unadapted.
mhm.
And these were the people that Cain was terrified of. So there are all sorts of little clues in there to tell you that there's a whole lot more going on. There are more kinds of human being on the planet, which we've discovered, of course, in the recent generation through the fossil record. And it takes us back to the drawing board to ask from scratch, okay, what did happen? Where did we come from? What was going on?
Yeah, because that's the whole thing is I get well,
I think you've muted yourself, Del. I think you may have muted yourself because I'm seeing a cross through your microphone. Okay. I don't think Dell can hear me. I'll try tapping it into the notes to clarify.
Mike, oh, there. Did you? Oh, did you? Sorry, I lose
I
you
think you
there,
muted
or I
yourself.
lost myself, I guess.
You did. You'd clicked
Nope.
something, but we're
Sorry.
back. We're back
Okay,
on
let me
track.
go back to here. Bing. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Did I lose? Oh, what happened here? 1 second. More private chat. You have muted yourself. Camera, guess more. Can you hear me yet? No?
Yes,
Just
yes,
one
we're loud and
second.
clear.
What I'm going to have to do here.